I've actually known Laura for longer than just today, although it feels like she's been here all day. She was here this afternoon working with our upper and middle school students and helping them understand a lot of these concepts, and it was really, really valuable. So we're very appreciative of her being here. I first got to know Laura, whom I'll introduce in a second, when she came and helped us here at the Academy with some different emergency kinds of situations, and we found her during those times to be such a valuable partner for some of our kids and parents, and all of the things you would want in those situations. So that I'm thrilled she's here. I want to make sure I get titles and things right. She's the manager of the Employee Assistance Program at TriCity Family Services. In this role, she works with local organizations to provide management and wellness trainings, and she's also worked with local school districts providing social emotional trainings to their staff and parents. She currently works with clients with a variety of concerns focusing on family therapy, and every time we've had her here, what she's had to say has been so valuable, and we're thrilled to continue to, as a community, think about these really, really important issues of emotional health. So Laura, we're thrilled you're here. Thank you.
So as Seth said, I've kind of been here all day. I went to the Gale Board and Library and did some work on my laptop. But yeah, earlier today I was honored to be able to meet with the upper school students as well as the middle school students. And it's a very similar presentation that you guys will be receiving tonight. So today we are going to be talking about self-compassion. And so I just wanted to kind of gauge what the ranges of the kids that you guys have. So like elementary school kids, middle school kids, high school kids. Okay, so just a little bit for the elementary. Okay, so again, this is very similar to what the middle school and the upper school kids received today. So when talking about self-compassion, I didn't want to get right into self-compassion because I wanted to kind of discuss adolescence a little bit and why self-compassion might be a really helpful thing at this point. So what we know about adolescence is that it's not super fun, right? It's a difficult stage. I don't know a lot of people that say, man, I really wish I could go back to when I was in those awkward teen years, right? So during adolescence, it's a period of change, and there's a lot of changes going on. There's lots of changes going on in the outside world. We see lots of transitions. So we see the transition from elementary school into middle school. We see a transition from middle school into high school. In addition to that, there's lots of relationship changes going on, right? There's kind of like this friendship shuffling, people that they were friends with for a long time. Maybe they're finding they don't have so much in common anymore, making friends with new people, and so that's a change. The importance that peer relationships have increases greatly, so what their peers think about them matters a lot more than what their family thinks about them, which can lead to some conflicts in the house. They're also kind of individuating and building their independence, which again can create some conflicts within the family atmosphere as well. So again, a lot of changes going on in the outside world. Oftentimes the workload is increasing, right, as they're getting older and there's more responsibilities. But there's also a lot of changes that are going on inside as well. So their brains are actually changing more during adolescence than any other time except for when they're toddlers. So we got toddlers and then we got adolescents. So a lot of development of their brains occurring at this point. Their brains are essentially getting ready to function as an adult and take on life as an adult. And there are two areas that really start changing around the same time, and I wanted to kind of go over these a little bit today. So the limbic system is one of the areas, as well as the prefrontal cortex, okay? So anybody remember what the limbic part of the brain is responsible for? I hear, oh, you said it, say it louder. Emotion. I can't hear either. Okay, so yes, the limbic system is important because it is our emotional part, right? So the limbic system and the prefrontal cortex really start changing around age 11 or 12. Now, the limbic system is pretty much developed by age 15 or 16, okay? So the changes that we can see in the limbic system are really that emotionality that we see in adolescents, right? They get overwhelmed faster maybe, they get stressed out, they might go from really relaxed to super angry or crying, right? A lot of variability going on there. This can lead to them feeling pretty insecure, and that can also make them more prone to self-criticism, and we're going to talk about that in a second. The other thing with the limbic system is that the development of the limbic system makes them less sensitive to getting really excited about things. So, you know, like when you're like, hey, we're going to Disney World, and they're like, great, right? Whereas in elementary school or toddler, they're like, you gotta peel them off the roof, right? So they're less excited about things. So essentially, they kind of up the ante, right? So they might take more risks or engage in trying new things that is more exciting. So this is where we get some of those poor decision making, right? So that's kind of what's going on in the limbic system. And again, it's typically developed about age 15, 16, give or take. Now the prefrontal cortex, that's the part right behind our forehead, what is that responsible for? Yeah. I'm sorry. Executive functioning, yes. So like decision making, moral reasoning, right? All these kind of things. So it's our higher level thinking, right? Planning, weighing the pros and cons of things, and controlling urges. So we used to think that this was developed like through age 18, but not so much, right? We've learned and they've determined that it continues to develop all the way up into 25. So we're talking about throughout adolescence, high school, college, right? Seth and I were just talking about the amount of pressure and having to decide what you want to do, right? And then get a job, and your brain's not even developed yet at that point in time. So again, we have these two parts of the brain developing at the same time, but not at the same rate, right? So we have them feeling less excited about things, wanting to take more risks, but the part that says, hey, wait a minute, what's going to happen if we do this is lagging. So that's why we get some of these interesting behaviors in adolescence. Again, this can encourage a feeling of insecurity, especially when they make poor decisions and they're experiencing some of these emotional lows, and it can also increase their ability to engage in self-criticism. So, wanted to talk about self-criticism because they tend to be more prone to that around this age. So self-criticism is that voice in your head, right? We all have that voice that tells us stuff. This is when that voice is being particularly mean to us, right? So that voice can tell us that we're not good enough, right? We're not smart enough, we're not pretty enough, we don't measure up to other people. Overall, we're not good enough. Our culture definitely perpetuates this. If you look at like all of the advertisements about all of these things that we need, you know, it kind of perpetuates the feeling that, you know, we're not good enough, so we need these things. We need all these beauty products, right? We need the right clothes. We need to present ourselves in the right way in order to be good enough. In addition to that, our culture really promotes that we have to be perfect. You think about all the social media, right? And all of that, and the presentation that everything is good and perfect. So it's not okay if we have flaws, and if we have flaws, we should probably keep those hidden and not tell anybody, because then they'll really know that we're not good enough. It won't just be us, but they'll know it too. So what happens is that when we're engaged in a lot of this self-criticism, we develop feelings that like we don't deserve to be happy, we don't deserve to be loved, we don't deserve to be safe or feel good about ourselves, okay? And again, the self-criticism kind of comes along with this very awkward stage and these changes that are going on both in our outside world and wanting to fit in with peers and trying to find out where we fit in with peers, as well as the changes that are going on within our brain. So if things aren't bad enough, this is something that is not necessarily specific to adolescents, but we all experience this. So I asked my husband if evolutionarily is a word, and he told me it was, so I put it in my PowerPoint.
I sent all the English teachers home, so it doesn't matter.
He went to school to be a social studies teacher, so I was like, all right, you're good enough, I'll take you. But we are wired for survival. We're not wired for happiness. So what happens is positive information that we get in, that tends to be less dangerous than negative information, right? So we tend to pay more attention to the negative information because we need to survive. In the past, what was threatening to us were more physical things, right? So if you go back to, the cavemen, like saber-toothed tigers chasing after us, bears, wild animals, okay, that's obviously a very physical challenge. I asked the kids if they had seen anything like that happening on campus. They told me no, but that the squirrels are a serious danger. So I'm not sure about that. But really, it's not so much the physical dangers that we're experiencing now, but more so these emotional dangers that we are interpreting as kind of these threats. So basically what we're doing is that we are trying to prepare ourselves for the worst case scenario so that we won't be caught off guard, so that we're ready in case that happens. Due to this negativity bias, it's just important that we are aware of that, because we kind of have to put in a little extra effort to see things clearly. Because, I also talk to the students about if you get a paperback, right, and there is feedback on it, you are less likely to pay attention to the positive feedback on there, and you're really just going to hone in on what the negative feedback is. The other thing that I have on here regarding the negativity bias is that thoughts are not facts, right? So we have thoughts going through our head all day long. And just because we have a thought doesn't actually mean that it is a fact or that it's true. And I do this with clients all the time. I'll say like, okay, what are you thinking? And then I'll challenge them, what's your evidence to that? Like, prove it to me. Just because it's in our head and just because we have that thought doesn't mean that it's the case. And the example that I gave the kids earlier was, so you're in a group of your peers and you guys are, talking, and you make a comment that may be kind of goofy or like, and people like, react to it and they, make fun of you a little bit. Okay, so like, what thought might that student have? They might have the thought that I'm such an idiot because I said something really stupid, right? And they all made fun of me for that. Now, is that a fact? Is that person really an idiot and stupid because they said that thing? Well, no. But oftentimes, because it's a thought that originated in our head and we hear it inside our head, we grab onto that and we believe that that's true. So, as you can tell, adolescence is not an easy time, but like I said, the negativity bias is something that we all experience, not just adolescents. So, I want to take a look at self-compassion, because self-compassion is something that can definitely help us deal with our self-criticism and deal with helping ourselves get through these things. So this is the Self-Compassion Scale, and I didn't show this to the kids because the presentation was a little bit shorter, but this is valid for ages 14 and up, and it's developed by Christine Neff. And I do have, you can go online and actually take it online on the website and it will score it for you. But I just wanted to kind of show you what kind of things are we looking at when we're talking about self-compassion. This is not the first time I've done this presentation, I have to admit. I did another self-compassion presentation and I went on and I found this scale and I was like, okay, let's see, right? I'm a therapist, I should know these kind of things, right? I did not score very well. I realized that I'm very compassionate towards other people, but maybe not so much to myself. So again, I just kind of wanted to show you what kind of things are we looking at here. So again, when I fail at something important to me, I become consumed by feelings of inadequacy. When something painful happens, I try to take a balanced view of the situation. I try to see my feelings as part of the human condition. Maybe not so much, right? So there's only 12 questions. When something upsets me, I try to keep my emotions in balance. When I'm feeling down, I tend to obsess and fixate on everything that's wrong. Maybe a little bit sometimes, right? So I would just kind of encourage you to take a look at these things and see like where you would be. So again, I can share with you the website. It's Kristen Knapp's website, and like it'll actually score it for you because there are different scales, and it shows you kind of like how you rate overall. But when we're working and trying to teach our children skills, a lot of times it's helpful to actually know and utilize those skills and be able to model those too, right? I have 2 children. I have a 6-year-old and a 4-year-old, and I'm learning that it's easier to say to do things than to actually do them, right? And so if we can teach ourselves to be more self-compassionate and can model that, that can obviously be very beneficial to our children as well. Okay, so what exactly is self-compassion? So very simply, it's learning to be a friend to ourselves. Okay, so like I said before, I'm a therapist. I'm pretty compassionate to other people, but it's about learning to then treat myself with that same compassion that I would treat my clients with or my friends with. A study showed that 78% of people identified that they are kinder to other people than they are to themselves. And I don't know that that's a big surprise if we think about, the way that we talk to ourselves within our heads. Like, would we say that to our best friend? Would we say that to, other people in our lives that we love and respect? Probably not, right? And the kids were like, maybe. I was like, okay, but would they continue being your friend if you treated them that way? No, they wouldn't. We wouldn't put up with that in another person, but yet we decided that it's okay to treat ourselves in that way. So self-compassion, it has 3 different parts, and we'll go through all of these separately. So self-kindness, common humanity, and mindfulness. So these are the 3 different components that make up self-compassion, okay? So this brings us to our first exercise. And I encourage everybody to participate in the exercises. I think you get more out of the presentation if you do, but you always have the choice not to. I don't make you do goofy things or embarrass yourself or anything like that, so don't worry. So if you're game for it, I would just encourage you to listen to what I say and participate. So what I would encourage you to do is to hold your 2 hands in front of you and make really tight fists, okay? So squeeze as tightly as you can and count to 30 slowly. So think about how this feels. Kind of hurts a little bit, right? Anybody's fingernails like digging into their hands? Not super comfortable, right? Anybody want it to stop? Yeah? Okay, so this is what self-criticism feels like, right? It's tight, it hurts, it's really uncomfortable, it's not fun. Okay, so we're close enough to 30 probably. So what I'd like you to do now is open your hands, palms up, okay? So what does this feel like? Relief? It is, it's kind of a relief, right? It feels open, maybe relaxing, especially over the tightened fists. So this is what mindfulness is gonna feel like, okay? It's about feeling whatever is here, right in this moment, and letting it in. So just being open to it. Okay, so next, stretch out your arms in front of you, keeping your hands open. It's a good Halloween joke, it makes everybody look like a zombie, right? But if we look at each other like this, it does kind of look like maybe, we're reaching out to each other, right? We're reaching out for a hug or we're waiting to receive a hug, right? So this is symbolic in this hand gesture of the common humanity, okay? So this is what common humanity feels like reaching out and being connected to others, being included, being a part of a group, okay? So lastly, I want you to take your hands and put it over your heart, okay? And we're just gonna rest them here for a second. And I want you to just kind of notice what this feels like. So there's a little bit of pressure, maybe some warmth on your chest. Maybe you feel protected or loved. So this is what self-kindness or self-compassion feels like. Okay, so I think the hand gesture, you can put your hands down, you can leave them there if you liked that, if that feels good. This is a very self-soothing, this is a self-compassion technique as well. But I think that kind of ties how they all kind of connect together. So again, we have that self-criticism, and self-compassion is really going to provide us a way to deal with that in a healthier manner. All right, so we're gonna move on to the first component of self-compassion, and this is self-kindness. I think that this might be like the most difficult component, perhaps, to deal with. So it's being nice to yourself. Okay, so again, saying kind words to yourself, those things that you would say to a friend. Okay, but saying those inward. We have been taught how to be kind since we were young, right? I mean, I know I'm saying this to my kids all the time. Was that a kind thing to do to your brother? Are you being kind, right? I asked both groups, what the golden rule was. You guys know what it is? Everybody knows the golden rule, right? We're taught to be kind to others, that we should be kind to others. But nobody teaches us that it's okay and that we should be kind to ourselves. So again, this is what the self-kindness is learning how to turn that inward. So the self-kindness, it counters that tendency to be harshly critical, okay? We talked about how thoughts are not facts, but we actually don't have control over our thoughts either. So we can't stop the judgmental thoughts from coming, but we do have control over how much energy we give them, what we decide to pay attention to. I kind of have it visualized in my head as like a ticker tape, right? Like the stocks, like there's just thoughts going through our head all day. But there are certain thoughts, for whatever reason, we grab and hold on to and let them have meaning in our life. So self-kindness is going to help us to deal with those judgmental thoughts, even though we can't necessarily stop them. One of the things that I like about self-compassion is that when we find ourselves being mean to ourselves, when we find ourselves being self-critical and really beating ourselves up, we can look at this as actually an opportunity for us to experience love and show ourselves love. And so it's not necessarily, again, that we're failing at things, that we're being, super mean to ourselves, or we're not a good person. But we're looking at it as more as an opportunity to kind of take care of ourselves and to show ourselves love. The second component is common humanity. So again, that was when we had kind of the zombie arms, right? And our arms were outstretched. So according to self-compassion and how self-compassion looks at suffering and hard times, is that everybody experiences uncomfortable feelings, right? So in my office, I have a list of 100 different emotions, okay? And kids are like, whoa. And I'm like, okay, I'm sure there's more than 100 too, right? But we have words for these things because we experience these things, and we need to be able to communicate what it is that we're feeling. So they're not the only one that's feeling this way. Oftentimes when we feel like we failed, when we've made a mistake, or things are hard and we're uncomfortable, our tendency is to withdraw and isolate, right? And by doing so, we feel like we're the only one that has ever had this experience. We're the only one that has ever felt this way. But what I stress to the kids is that, especially in adolescence and what they're going through, they're all in this together. And they're all insecure, and they're all experiencing uncomfortable emotions. And we, as humans and adults, are in the same boat too. So again, the idea of common humanity, it basically honors the fact that life in general entails suffering. It's hard. Again, I think culture has perpetuated this idea that everybody's supposed to be happy. We're supposed to be happy all the time, which is exhausting and not realistic, right? And so this just honors the fact that no, that's not true. Like, we are not supposed to be happy all the time. Everybody struggles, everybody experiences uncomfortable emotions, and that's part of the human experience. So we're not alone in this. And again, so when we are experiencing these hard times, we can look at it again as an opportunity to feel connected to others. So again, not to withdraw and isolate, but that this is actually giving us a chance to feel connected to others and realize that we're all in this together. Okay? The third component is mindfulness. And mindfulness has gotten a lot of more attention recently. It's been around forever, but like now it's kind of like a hip, cool thing. And there is a lot of research going on about mindfulness, and it is extremely helpful and beneficial. And so mindfulness is basically just paying attention intentionally, essentially. So we're paying attention to whatever it is that we're experiencing in this present moment with a sense of curiosity and without judgment, right? So we're not, you know, if we're sitting here, we're saying, you know, I'm sad or I'm tired. I shouldn't be tired, right? I shouldn't be feeling this way. No, we're just paying attention to whatever our experience is and accepting that. So again, those were our hands, our palms just open, right? So we're just accepting and experiencing whatever it is that our current experience is. So again, that's being open to the reality of the present moment, allowing all thoughts, emotions, and sensations to enter. Mindfulness, when we talked about that negativity bias in the beginning, right, and how we tend to pay more attention to all of the negative input that we're getting as opposed to the positive, mindfulness helps us counter that because it actually helps us to realize what is really happening and not necessarily what we're afraid would happen or could happen, okay? So it helps us to see the facts because it helps us to take a moment and to actually be in the moment and say, okay, what is it that I'm feeling? What is it that I'm thinking? And how am I experiencing this time? Part of why that's so essential to self-compassion is that it's hard to be compassionate to yourself and to provide yourself with what you need is if you don't know what that is. So in order to know what it is that we need, we actually have to stop and feel in order to identify what is it that's going on. There's a couple different catchphrases. You know, you can't heal what you can't feel. So again, we can't heal it if we don't actually allow ourselves to feel it and be in it. Dr. Dan Siegel, he's done a lot of work on the teenage mind and just the brain in general. And so one of his slogans is name it to tame it. So again, if we don't know what it is that we're feeling, then we can't work on it. But there is a lot of power in being able to identify and give it a name and say, this is what I'm feeling. I'm feeling disappointed. That can help us tremendously. So again, the mindfulness is a necessary part to help us to calm down and to take a moment and to feel whatever it is that we're feeling so that we can identify what is it that we're in need of and how can we take care of ourselves, okay? So, in speaking about mindfulness, I wanted to introduce a mindfulness exercise. Sometimes when people talk about mindfulness, it's kind of like, well, what is it and what does this mean? And if we talk about meditation, that's really scary and like, you know, I don't know, I have to have a special room in my house for this kind of thing. So I wanted to just take you guys through a mindfulness exercise. And I did this with the kids, and this is why you guys have your stone. So again, I would encourage you guys to participate, but if you don't feel up to it, that's fine. But if you are, I would encourage you to take your stone and hold it in your hand. So study your stone carefully. So I want you to look at the colors. There are different shades, different hues. Are there any like distinguishing marks or lines in your stone? Does your stone reflect the light or does it not? Depending on which stone you selected, you might want to hold it up to the light. I know some people selected some white ones, right? So just kind of take it all in. So now we're going to notice the shape and the texture. So sometimes it's helpful to do this with your eyes closed, but is it smooth? Is it rough? Is it a combination? Does it feel the same all over? Is the stone cool to the touch? Or is it warm? Does the stone have a smell? I know everybody's favorite part. If so, what does it smell like? Is it a pleasant smell? Is it an unpleasant smell? So I really encouraged you to take you know, time and like look at the stone. So like if I asked you to put it back in the bucket and pick it out, like would you be able to? Yeah, some of you guys are saying yes, that you feel confident in that. So mindfulness engages a lot of our senses and helps ground us and bring us into this present moment. So our physical sensations, again, just connect us to the present moment. So as you can see here, we looked at sight, right? We involved our tactile, our touch, and then also our smell. Oftentimes, I do another mindfulness exercise with a raisin, so that includes taste as well. But the more that we can pull on all of our senses, that can help us to bring us into the present moment. So when we were in this moment, was anybody thinking about like what they needed to do tomorrow? No? So like that's what mindfulness is about. And at times, sometimes that happens. Those thoughts creep in. It's like, okay, this lady's talking, but I really got a lot to do tomorrow, right? And then that's part of practicing mindfulness and developing that skill is, okay, when those thoughts come in, to again, not be judging of yourself and not be like, oh, I'm really horrible, this mindfulness thing, this is not meant for me. But to say, okay, I'm going to refocus and come back to this, okay? So mindfulness is a skill that you can learn and develop. And again, it just helps you to focus on the present moment. So we're not worrying about what we haven't done or what we need to do, but just what's going on in the here and now. Okay. So I want to talk a little bit about the physiology of self-compassion. So like, how does this work and why does this work? So the reptilian brain is obviously the first to develop, so evolutionarily the first to develop, and also in utero the first to develop. And that is where those survival skills are, right? So that's where our fight, flight, and freeze response is. So if we feel like we are in danger, and again, these used to be coming from physical dangers, but what we're seeing now is emotional danger is kind of triggering those responses. The reptilian brain kicks in to help protect us, okay? When we experience that, though, it's very uncomfortable, right? So people talk about having panic attacks, or kids will talk about, like, freaking out, right? That's because it's the reptilian brain triggering these responses. The mammalian brain is second on the scene, and so this is that limbic system that we were talking about, right? These are our emotions. So what is happening when we're engaging in self-compassion is we're deactivating that fight, flight, or freeze response that's coming out of the reptilian brain, and we're activating the care system and the mammalian brain, okay? So mindfulness, what we just did, it helps us to avoid taking that road to fight, flight, or freeze, and it helps to direct us up to the mammalian brain, okay? So that's part of the physiology of self-compassion. So if we look at it kind of in another way, again, if I'm faced with a danger, and if I if it was a physical danger, I have a couple options, right? I can stand there and fight and try to survive that way, right? I can flight, so I can try to book it out of there. And then unfortunately, sometimes people freeze, and that could be beneficial at times. So those are our stress responses. If we turn those stress responses inward, if we're a fighter, what tends to happen is that self-criticism happens, okay? But self-compassion provides us with an alternate. Instead of engaging in that self-criticism, we can acknowledge that and see that, but then be kind to ourselves, okay? If we tend to respond with flight and we book it out of there, that stress response turned inward is that isolation that we see, okay? So disengaging from people, maybe we're realizing that we're flawed and we don't want to show other people that, so again, we just kind of isolate. Self-compassion, though, has an alternate to that. So instead of isolating, it says, no, you're not the only one that's felt that way. You're not the only one that's not perfect. We're all not perfect, and that's part of being human, okay? So that's how it kind of helps move it out of that. And then finally, the freeze. If that's turned inward, it tends to look like ruminations. We just go over things again, like, oh, I can't believe I said that. I can't believe I did that. I should have worked harder on that, right? Obviously, we can see how that keeps us stuck. We're not moving anywhere if we're constantly thinking about what we should have done, because we can't change the past. So again, the self-compassion component to that is that mindfulness, and that brings us into the present moment and into our current experience to help move us forward, okay? So that is kind of a very brief overview of the physiology of self-compassion. So I don't know if any of these things went through anybody's mind when we've been talking about self-compassion, but you know, when something is being studied and it's like, oh, there seem to be a lot of benefits to this, there's also a lot of concern about, okay, well, is this really helpful, and what about the potential negatives? So these are some things that have been brought up as concerns for self-compassion, but they have been found through studies to be not accurate. So one concern has been that it's a form of self-pity, right? So self-pity says poor is me. Well, hopefully, as we've been talking, you realize that that's not what it's about, because again, with that common humanity piece, we're not saying poor me, we're saying poor us, right? We're all in this together, and this is hard for everybody. Studies have showed that self-compassionate people are more likely to actually engage in perspective taking, so to see other people's point of view than focusing on their own distress. And they're also less likely to ruminate on how bad things are. So it's really not a pity party for me if we're engaging in self-compassion. Another concern has been that it makes us weak and vulnerable. But what we see is actually self-compassion tends to be a reliable source of strength that confers courage and enhances our resiliency when we're faced with difficulties. And if you have heard of Brené Brown, she talks a lot about vulnerability and the power of vulnerability. And so that's just more support for that. Or you might say that it might be selfish and self-focused. So again, we're taught to be kind to other people, but we're not taught to be kind to ourselves. It's not that if I'm kind to you, I can't be kind to myself, or if I'm kind to myself, I can't be kind to you. I can be kind to myself and I can be kind to you. So I don't really get the selfish piece of that. The other thing is that studies have showed that people who have engaged in these self-compassion programs, they actually tend to be more caring and supportive in their relationships. They're more likely to compromise in relationship conflicts, and they're more compassionate and forgiving towards others. So again, they're not so self-focused. Self-compassion, there have been concerns that, again, like it's just an excuse for bad behavior, right? So make a bad choice, or like you fail, and it's just like letting yourself off the hook. But when we think about it, it's actually the opposite. So self-compassion allows you to admit that you've made mistakes, take responsibility for those things, because you're still there to be nice to yourself when it is that you've acknowledged that and you're hurting. It helps kind of pick you back up and say, okay, yeah, I did this and it wasn't great, but I'm not a horrible person. I'm gonna treat myself with self-compassion. I'm gonna be kind to myself, and I'm gonna learn from this. And then finally, there have been concerns about it undermining somebody's motivation to achieve. So this is the third time I told this story tonight. Benita can attest to that. So I have two brothers, so I'm sandwiched in between them, and they both play basketball in high school, so I have seen a lot of high school basketball. And I think it was one of my little brother's games, but this team that they played, it really stuck out for me because the coach, every time out, every quarter, like halftime, the coach would be down in the middle of the court, and this was like a varsity game, so there's a lot of people there, just berating his players in front of everybody. And I can only assume that he thought that this was going to be a way to motivate them. But when we engage in self-criticism, which is essentially he was criticizing them, it doesn't help us, it doesn't motivate us. What helps to motivate us is self-confidence. And when we engage in self-compassion, it tends to decrease our potential fear for failure. We care about ourselves when we're engaged in self-compassion, and so we want us to reach our full potential. People who practice self-compassion, they still have high personal standards, but they don't beat themselves up when they fail. So again, where we feel like we can take responsibility for our actions, people who practice self-compassion, they're less afraid of failure, because if they do fail, it's not so big of a hit to them. They're more likely to try again, and they're more likely to persist in their efforts, because whether they succeed or fail, they continue to be kind to themselves. So what studies have shown in terms of self-compassion is that people who practice self-compassion tend to have decreased depression, anxiety, stress, and shame, and increased happiness, life satisfaction, self-confidence, and increased physical health. Not too shabby, right? I'm in for this, I think. So I didn't feel like I could come up here and talk about self-compassion with not talking about self-esteem, right? Because we've heard about self-esteem, and if high self-esteem is really helpful, and how do we increase self-esteem? And it's true, self-esteem has a lot of the same benefits as were on the previous slide that I just showed you. But self-esteem also has some drawbacks that we've noticed that self-compassion doesn't necessarily have. So self-esteem is basically how we understand ourselves and our own worth and value in the world. And it's basically determined by evaluating and comparing ourselves to others, okay? So in this society, in order to have high self-esteem, we have to be special and we have to be above average. Is it possible to be special and above average in everything? No? I don't think so, and I don't know if I would recommend us trying for that. When we look at just like statistics in a normal bell curve, like somebody's got to be in the middle. You can't have everybody up at the top. It just doesn't work that way. Then what makes you special? If everybody is up at the top, you're not special anymore, right? So the danger comes in like, how do we achieve this high self-esteem? So what happens is, if there's something that I'm not good at, if I value that and I fail at it, that's going to hurt my self-esteem. So I have a couple choices. What tends to happen is that I decide that, okay, I'm gonna protect myself, right? I'm looking for that worst case scenario. So like, I don't really care about that, right? Like, I'm not very good at math, so guess what? I don't care about math, it's not important to me, right? So that's how I kind of maintain my self-esteem, right? This is unfortunate because then we kind of give up on things that we could potentially be successful in. The other way to gain high self-esteem is, like, if I want high self-esteem and I'm not really great at things, well then I'm gonna put you down. I'm gonna push you down so that I can raise myself up, right? Talk about bullies, and people say like, well, bullies must not have high self-esteem. Well, they do, because that's how they get their high self-esteem, is by putting other people down and pushing other people down. Narcissism is another thing that people are attributing to kind of coming out of self-esteem, like that need to have such high self-esteem and to see ourselves as special and above average can potentially lead to narcissism as well. So compared with self-esteem, self-compassion is a much more reliable source of support, okay? Self-esteem is based on our performance, and so if we perform really well, if we had a really good game, if we did really well on a test, that's great. Our self-esteem is high. But what happens when we didn't have such a great game, right? Or we didn't do so great on that test? Our self-esteem is low, we're uncomfortable, and what do we have to fall back on? Not a whole lot. Self-compassion, again, in those situations, it's not based on our performance, and so if we are in one of those lows, right, we had a bad game, we still have that self-kindness to pull us back. So it's there, and we're able to use it because we're hurting. We can be kind to ourselves because of that. So again, it's not based on how successful we are in that moment, but we're able to be with ourselves when we are not doing good. The other thing is self-compassion tends to be less contingent on conditions like physical attractiveness or successful performance. I love that this is being taped, it's great. So again, self-esteem is, tied to those things. So again, not as stable. Okay. So, bringing it all together, this is an exercise called Moment for Me, or it's also called like a self-compassion break. It just kind of depends on who you're reading that day. But this gives you a chance to basically take a moment to soothe yourself in the moment when you most need it. So again, an analogy that I've used with my clients, and it is very timely right now, you know, we have to learn a lot of these skills so that when we need them, we have them. And I have said to them before, you know, because I work with boys sometimes, you gotta pull out the sports analogies with them, right? And so I've said, would you want to go into the World Series never having swung a bat before, right? Well, no. So what we have to do is we have to practice these things so that when we are in these times, when we're experiencing these uncomfortable emotions, we have these skills to utilize, okay? So a moment for me, it can be done in a couple different ways. It can be used as a meditation, which it takes about 20 minutes, and it's a guided meditation, so you're just kind of like listening and following along. Or it can be used like in the present moment when, you know, you're feeling hurt, when you're feeling low, and you're needing to kind of, again, treat yourself with some self-compassion. So if you would like to participate, I would encourage you to do so. And so what I'm going to ask you to do is to just think about a situation that's a little bit upsetting to you. So I don't want to trigger anybody. We're not going to think about like the bad thing in here because I'm getting tired and I want to go home. So think about something that might just be a little bit upsetting, right? So maybe it was an interaction with a coworker, maybe it was an interaction with your child, anything, something that, you know, is just kind of a little bit bothering you. Okay, so hopefully we have some idea of an example. So the first step in the moment of me is the mindfulness step. So again, I've asked you to think about this and kind of bring it to your forefront. Okay, so we're taking a moment and we're bringing it to our awareness. So the first step is to identify that this is difficult, right? So it's something that's a little bit upsetting to you, it's something that's bothering you. So again, you have to kind of find the right words for you and for the situation. With adults, sometimes, you know, they say like, this is suffering. To me, that sounds kind of harsh, right? But like, this is difficult, this is hard, you know, might be more appropriate. And the other thing that I'll encourage you to do as we're kind of thinking about that situation is, again, what is the feeling that you're having? So if we have to name it to tame it, and we can't heal it if we don't feel it, what is the feeling? Are we upset? Are we disappointed? Are we angry? What is the feeling that we're having? Okay, so that's the first step. The second step is common humanity. And so what this might look like, again, is we're not going to isolate, we're not going to think that we're the only ones that have ever felt this way. We're going to accept that this is part of the human experience, and so we're going to identify that I'm not alone, right? So maybe feeling this way is a part of being human, or you say to yourself, we all feel these feelings at some time or another, okay? I'm not the only one who's felt this way, and I know that. Step 3 is that self-kindness. Okay, and again, I think this sometimes is the hardest one, because basically, now that we kind of know what our feelings are, what we have to identify is what is it that we're needing from ourselves? What is it that we need to hear us say? So another way to kind of think about it is like, so if you were talking to a friend and your friend was in this situation, what would you say to them? Or if you were talking to a friend and you were telling them about your situation, what is it that you were hoping to hear from them? Okay, I do have just a bunch of possibilities up here. And again, you have to find what's right for you and what's right for that situation. But, you know, is it that you need to hear that I belong, that I'm supported, that I'm worthy, that I'm enough? So again, it's finding what are your feelings and what is it that you need to hear and what is it that you need to give yourself in that moment. So when it all comes together, again, we might want to engage some sort of physical touch. So we might put our hands over our chest, we might take a couple deep breaths, right? And when we put all the 3 components together, it might sound something like this, right? This hurts. Everyone has felt like this at some point. May I give myself what I need? I am enough. So again, that's something that like if you're in one of those difficult moments, you can kind of pause and work through. But again, this is a skill that you're looking to build up so that when you are in one of those difficult moments, you can kind of take that time to really sort through your feelings and be able to respond to yourself in a self-compassionate way as opposed to those self-critical thoughts just coming. There are a lot of things that we do for ourselves that are also self-compassion or showing self-compassion, and there are things that your kids do for yourselves or for themselves. So I just wanted to give an example of what some of these things are. So we're not horrible, right? We know that sometimes we get super stressed and we can feel that, and we know that we kind of need to do something a little bit extra, right? So the adults might look a little bit different. It still might be going shopping, but maybe it's getting this massage, getting a pedicure, getting a manicure. What do guys do?
Put down a screen.
The guys are looking really confused. So there are things, you gotta find what your thing is, okay? So, what are some next steps? You know, what I told the kids is if this is something that's of interest to you, if you enjoyed any of the activities, you know, continue to practice this. The here and now stone, you know, I let them all take them home or take them out of this room wherever they want, I don't know. You know, but they can use those at any point. You don't have to have a stone, right? So like if you're finding yourself in a moment, like I got a paper clip here, I can do those with a paper clip. You can do it with any object, right? We have our senses, we just have to engage our senses to ground us and bring us back to this moment. If you're interested in learning more, again, there's a lot of research on this. Research regarding self-compassion in adults and the benefits have been going on for about 25 years. And with teens, it's been going on for about 10 years. So again, there's lots of positive results showing that this does in fact, you know, make a difference. So I did just give you guys a list of some different resources here, some books. And I do have some of the books. So this is a self-compassion workbook for teens. The cool thing about this is that you also have access to a lot of the meditations. You can download them off their website and follow through that way. The adult version, so again, this is Kristen Neff and Christopher Germer, is the Mindful Self-Compassion Workbook. So again, you can kind of work through these. And then this is more for the younger guys, so the elementary school kids. Sitting Still Like a Frog activity book. So again, you know, we're working on teaching mindfulness, especially in therapy, very young. And it's done in a fun way, so it's not necessarily like super serious. But we're helping to teach them to learn these skills so that they have them throughout their lives. And then again, just a list of websites here. So there's information in there about the studies as well as more resources. And then that self-compassion scale that I gave you guys, the website is on there as well. So if you wanted to go on and take it and see kind of how you scored, it does split it up into the different subscales. So you can see like, maybe I'm really good at common humanity, but that self-kindness, like I kind of got to work on that, right? So again, I would just encourage you guys, if you're interested, to kind of take a look at these things. But thank you so much for coming. I appreciate your interest. If you have any questions or want to take a look at the books, I'm up here. But again, thank you so much.